You think you know 70s horror, but beneath the headlines and Hollywood hype, there were darker films, stranger ones, movies buried on dusty shelves, whispered about, then forgotten. Tonight, we dig them back up. These are 10 obscure 70s horror movies you've probably never seen, and some of them were never meant to be found. Let's Scare Jessica to Death is one of those quiet nightmares that settles into your bones. Directed by John D. Hancock in 1971, it's a slow, spectral drift through paranoia and isolation. The kind of film that feels like a waking dream you can't shake off. Zora Lampert stars as Jessica, a woman recovering from a nervous breakdown who moves with her husband to a rural farmhouse in the Connecticut countryside. She wants peace, a new beginning, but the countryside offers neither. The house feels occupied, the lake hides whispers, and a strange young woman who appears nearby seems to know far more than she should. It's never clear whether the horror comes from outside Jessica or from within her mind, and that uncertainty is what makes it so haunting. The film's mood is thick with unease. Sunlit fields that feel too quiet, voices echoing just beneath the soundtrack, and silences that stretch too long. With its ghostly ambiguity and unnerving calm, Let's Scare Jessica to Death isn't just another haunted house film. It's a meditation on fragility. The fear of slipping into madness while the world keeps pretending everything's fine. Some nightmares aren't born from monsters, they're born from guilt. The Severed Arm, 1973, directed by Tom Alderman, is a grim little gem from the drive-in era that takes a simple idea, survival, desperation, and payback, and turns it into something deeply unsettling. It opens with a group of old friends haunted by a secret they swore to bury. Years earlier, they were trapped in a cave, cut off from the world, and starving. What happened down there was supposed to stay hidden forever till one of them begins receiving strange messages and the others start dying one by one. The film never leans on gore or spectacle. Instead, it builds dread through silence and inevitability. The setting feels claustrophobic even when the characters are free. A world where the walls never really stopped closing in. The score hums like a nervous heartbeat, and the camera lingers just a little too long, giving everything a grim, sweaty tension. What makes The Severed Arm stand out is how it treats horror as consequence. The real terror isn't in the attacks. It's in watching guilt fester and consume the people who thought they got away with something. It's rough around the edges, unmistakably low budget, but it has that raw, unnerving quality that defined 1970s horror. The kind of movie that feels like a bad dream you might have rented by accident and can't quite forget after. There's something unnerving about mannequins. The blank faces, the frozen stares, the way they almost seem alive when the light shifts. Tourist Trap, 1979, directed by David Schmeller, takes that discomfort and stretches it into one of the strangest, most surreal horror films of the decade. The story follows a group of travelers whose car breaks down on a forgotten back road. Seeking help, they wander into a roadside attraction, a dusty museum of mannequins and curiosities, run by a kindly old man who seems just a little too eager to have visitors. It doesn't take long before the smiles start to crack, and the museum reveals a life of its own. What makes Tourist Trap so memorable isn't just its supernatural edge, the bizarre tone. The mannequins don't simply sit there, they move, whisper, and laugh. Caught somewhere between a slasher, a ghost story, and an acid trip, Chuck Connors gives a mesmerizing performance as the owner of the museum. Equal parts tragic, lonely, and terrifying. Every creak, every turn of the camera feels alive with menace. You're never sure what's real or what's being manipulated. It's that combination of innocence and insanity, whimsy and horror that makes Tourist Trap feel like a film you stumbled upon by accident late at night. One that leaves you staring at department store windows a little differently afterward. Some horror movies feel like nightmares, not because of what happens, but because of how they move. Messiah of Evil, 1973, directed by Willard Huyck and Gloria Katz, drifts through a seaside town that seems to exist just outside reality. It begins with a woman named Arletty, who travels to the lonely coastal community of Point Dune to find her missing father. What she discovers instead is a town that feels abandoned yet strangely inhabited. Its residents quiet, pale, and watching. There are whispers of an ancient evil tied to the ocean, and a figure who promises salvation through something unspeakable. What makes Messiah of Evil stand apart isn't its story, it's the way it feels. The film is drenched in atmosphere filled with bold, surreal images. Deserted streets glowing under blood-red skies, silent crowds gathering in a movie theater, and long, echoing hallways that seem to go nowhere. It's horror as hypnosis, a dream where the rules of logic no longer apply. The sound design hums with dread, and the pacing feels almost ritualistic, drawing you deeper into the fog. For those who love films that unsettle rather than explain, Messiah of Evil is a must-see. It's haunting, disorienting, and completely unforgettable. A lost 1970s masterpiece that proves horror doesn't need coherence to get under your skin. After The Exorcist shook the world in 1973, a wave of possession films flooded theaters, but few were as strange, stylish, or unsettling as Beyond the Door. Directed by Ovidio G. Asinitis, this Italian-American production takes the familiar idea of demonic influence and filters it through something far weirder. Juliette Mills stars as Jessica Barrett, a San Francisco mother whose pregnancy takes a disturbing turn. What begins with mood swings and eerie whispers soon spirals into something unholy as she's consumed by forces that may not want her baby, they may want her. Her husband and children watch helplessly as the line between reality and possession dissolves, leaving only chaos. What makes Beyond the Door unforgettable isn't just its shocks, though it has plenty of those. Spinning heads, guttural voices, and rooms that seem alive with evil. It's the tone. The film feels unstable, like a nightmare that keeps rewriting itself. Its blend of melodrama, surrealism, and genuine terror gives it an energy unlike anything else from the era. Some moments are frightening, others almost absurd, but together they create a film that feels cursed in the best possible way. A perfect example of 1970s horror at its most experimental. Few films capture the quiet horror of a fractured mind quite like The Witch Who Came from the Sea, 1976. Directed by Matt Cimber and starring Millie Perkins, this haunting psychological horror blends exploitation with something far more tragic and introspective. Molly is a woman adrift, gentle, childlike, and forever haunted by memories she can't quite face. She spends her days reminiscing about an idyllic childhood that may never have existed and her nights lost in violent fantasies that begin to spill into reality. Her obsession with beauty, fame, and control masks a deep, festering trauma that gradually consumes her. Set against the hazy backdrop of coastal California, the film feels like a mirage. Sunlit but sickly, beautiful yet bruised. Every frame seems to shimmer with heat and heartbreak. The cinematography captures the ocean as both sanctuary and threat, a place where memory and madness blur together. Millie Perkins gives a mesmerizing performance. Fragile one moment, feral the next, and the film itself walks that same line. It's not about witches or spells in the literal sense, but about the darkness that grows when pain festers unchecked. The Witch Who Came from the Sea caused controversy upon release for its raw depiction of violence and sexuality. But over time, it's been recognized as something more, a strange, sad elegy about trauma, repression, and the monsters we create to survive. It's not an easy watch, but it's an unforgettable one. Quiet, disturbing, and oddly poetic. Some horror doesn't scream. It whispers. Symptoms, 1974, directed by José Ramón Larraz, is one of those rare, slow-burning psychological horrors that chills through silence rather than shock. The story follows Helen, a fragile woman living in isolation at a secluded English manor. When she invites her friend Anne to stay for the summer, the peaceful countryside begins to feel suffocating. The air thickens, the woods seem to close in, and Helen's moods shift like the weather. Tender one moment, cold and distant the next. The film moves at a hypnotic pace, letting tension crawl into every quiet space. There are no cheap scares here, only glances, silences, and shadows that seem to move when you're not looking. Laris's camera lingers on reflections, ripples in the lake, and the empty halls of the house as if the building itself is holding its breath. Angela Pleasance delivers a masterful performance as Helen, delicate, unnerving, and deeply human. You never quite know whether she's the victim, the threat, or both. That uncertainty becomes the real horror. By the time Symptoms reaches its conclusion, it's less about answers and more about the feeling of losing yourself inside someone else's madness. It's eerie, intimate, and heartbreakingly lonely. A forgotten treasure that proves atmosphere can be far more terrifying than blood. Before zombie horror became predictable, Let Sleeping Corpses Lie, 1974, directed by Jorge Grau, this Spanish-Italian production took the slow dread of Night of the Living Dead and transplanted it to the damp English countryside. The story begins simply. Two strangers, George and Edna, cross paths on a weekend drive. A wrong turn leads them to a sleepy rural town where locals whisper about strange happenings at the nearby farms. An experimental machine designed to control pests through ultrasonic radiation is being tested in the area, but its side effect? It doesn't just kill insects, it wakes the dead. From there, the film descends into chaos. Shadows move in daylight, morgues don't stay quiet, and the authorities refuse to believe what's happening. Arthur Kennedy steals scenes as the hard-nosed inspector, so consumed by his prejudice that he becomes as dangerous as the ghouls themselves. Grau's direction gives everything a funereal beauty. The landscape is green and radiant, but it feels cursed. Every breeze seems to carry decay. The practical effects are outstanding for their time. Wet, grim, and tactile, but it's the tone that makes this film unforgettable. It's angry, mournful, and strangely environmental, warning that humanity's meddling with nature always carries a price. Let Sleeping Corpses Lie may have borrowed the bones of Romero's vision, but it gave them a soul of its own, elegiac, apocalyptic, and unnervingly plausible. Nearly 50 years later, it still crawls under your skin, proof that sometimes the dead should stay exactly where they are. If paranoia had an address, it would be the brownstone at the heart of the Sentinel, 1977. Directed by Michael Winner, this unsettling supernatural thriller blends psychological dread with religious horror, creating one of the most quietly disturbing films of the decade. The story follows Allison Parker, a fashion model looking for independence and a fresh start. She finds the perfect apartment in a quiet Brooklyn building, spacious, affordable, and filled with eccentric neighbors. But almost immediately something feels wrong. Strange noises echo through the halls at night. The tenants seem off. From that setup, the Sentinel unfolds with slow, deliberate unease. Allison's fragile mental state begins to unravel as the house itself seems to tighten around her. The film's atmosphere is thick with tension, a mix of isolation, guilt, and a creeping sense that something ancient is hiding behind the walls. What makes The Sentinel stand out is its duality. It plays like a sleek psychological drama on the surface, but beneath it pulses a full-blown descent into the supernatural. The cast is a who's who of 1970s cinema, including Christina Rains, Chris Sarandon, Burgess Meredith, and even a young Jeff Goldblum, each bringing a layer of grounded realism to the madness. Winner doesn't rely on jump scares. Instead, he lets dread simmer. The imagery, religious icons, flickering candles, and decaying beauty feels lifted from a nightmare you're not sure you want to wake from. The Sentinel is a haunting meditation on sin, redemption, and the unseen battle between light and darkness. By the late 1970s, horror had explored nearly every corner of the supernatural, but nothing quite like the Manitou. Directed by William Girdler, this film takes those familiar fears and twists them into something far stranger, a collision between modern medicine, ancient mysticism, and the kind of cosmic horror that feels just slightly out of control. The story centers on Karen, played by Susan Strasberg, who discovers a lump on the back of her neck that grows larger by the day. Doctors can't explain it, and when surgery fails, her boyfriend Harry, a small-time psychic played by Tony Curtis, realizes something far darker is taking shape beneath her skin. What's growing there isn't a tumor at all. Technology turns hostile. The supernatural and the scientific begin to blur, creating an atmosphere of pure disorientation. Burgess Meredith appears as an eccentric scholar who knows more than he lets on, while Michael Ansara grounds the film with a quiet, commanding performance as a modern medicine man forced to confront ancient power. What makes the Manitou stand out isn't just its premise, but its sincerity. There's a sense that the filmmakers truly believed in the story's cosmic scope, and that belief gives it power. Beneath the spectacle, the Manitou taps into one of horror's oldest ideas, that progress and science can't protect us from the ancient forces that came before. The Manitou closes out the decade the way only the 1970s could, bold, bizarre, and completely unafraid to stare straight into the unknown. And there you have it, 10 forgotten nightmares from the 1970s that crawled out of the shadows and never really went back. Each one is strange, haunting, and proof that horror didn't need giant budgets or endless sequels to get under your skin. If you enjoyed wandering through the decade of grainy screams and flickering candlelight, hit like, subscribe, and leave a comment with the 70s horror gem that still keeps you up at night. For more dives into the eerie, the elegant, and the long-buried corners of vintage terror, stay tuned right here on Silver Shivers, where the past is always darker than you remember.